I am a very big patriot, but there's nothing that pisses me off about being Kenyan. Like the whole thing with us losing our identity and the fact that we lost our culture so bad, so bad. And for what? So that we can follow the Westerners' way of living, the Westerners' standards. We have decided to be copycats of the Western man's ideals so much that we cannot even come up with something that is our own. And it's not because we do not have things that are our own, it's because we chose to abandon them. And I use the word copycat because you have to rely on the original to release something so that you can copy it. And that's what happens. That's why Africa is not leading in anything meaningful in terms of development. Why? Because all the standards we use, all the metrics of development and the parameters of, shaping our economies that we are using were things that were imposed on us by the white man. And like fools, we bought into them. Meaning, we are following them. And by following, straight up means we can never be the leaders. I don't know why it has never dawned on us to realize this, but that's the case. And I'm not even speaking from an economic or development perspective. I'm speaking from a cultural, arts, and identity perspective because I look at countries like China, Japan, India, and these are countries that we're going to use as our case studies. These are countries that were also under colonial rule at some point, and even during the colonial rule, they still chose to not abandon their culture. There was a lot of resistance, and even when the colonizer left, they resorted back to their culture. They appreciated modernity, but that wasn't an excuse for them to abandon their culture. What they did instead was they fused modernity with their culture to create the global phenomenons that are now identified as, I don't know, Japanese aesthetics, Japanese fashion, Chinese architecture, I don't know, Indian fashion, all these things, Indian filmmaking, name them. There's a whole lot of cultural phenomena that are happening in these countries that are informed by their culture. Why? Because these people did not abandon their culture. Instead, they used modernity to fuse with their culture to create what we now have as a neocultural modernism of these specific cultures. However, here we have Kenya, 42 tribes, 42, and nothing, absolutely nothing to show for it. Nothing except, I don't know, some small cultural festivals here and there, and I don't know, some few functions like Rurashios, maybe once or twice a year, depending on the whole situation with your family and marriage, you know, and that's the only time you get to have a small taste of culture. But throughout the entire year, nothing else. Nothing. We don't have our own stories to tell. Not we don't have, we choose not to tell them. Yet, I can tell you personally, as a Kikuyu man, I have hundreds of folk stories from pre-colonial Kenya that I could use to create films, to tell stories. And that is why I'm making this video, because I've made a vow with myself that I'm going to be one of the people on the forefront to tell Kenyan stories from a Kenyan perspective, even historically speaking, and giving Kenya an identity. Because I, for one, as a filmmaker, appreciate the lengths that you have come in terms of development when it comes to filmmaking. And I look at the productions that you are able to pull off, and they deserve some applause because we are catching up with the rest of the world. It's good. But the problem now comes with the stories. The stories we're telling are just adaptations of the white man's lifestyles. They are not relatable, even one bit, with our people. Go look at the productions you see in Showmax and, I don't know, Maisha Magic. What other channel gives high quality content? I don't know, even sometimes even in Citizen. These are not relatable stories, man. They're not. They're not. And even if they are relatable, it's from a post-modernity perspective. It doesn't have anything cultural, anything that is uniquely Kenyan about them. And that's a problem. That's the thing I'm addressing. We lost our way. Granted that we have 42 tribes, we could be having 42 different architectural designs or interior designs that are, marketable globally or even nationally as an aesthetic that you could choose to go for in terms of how your house looks, how your interior design looks. But we don't have that. When it comes to fashion, we could fuse all these traditional garments we have with the modern ones that we have and create looks that are uniquely ours, and own them and wear them, and even accept them into our corporate spaces and all these things, because that's who we are, and it would still be magnificent. But we don't do that. We don't do that. And it's not because we can't, it's not because we don't have the resources, it's because in our minds we're still colonized. In our minds we want to be like the white man. In our minds our culture is bullcrap and old, and those are things of the back in the days. And instead, let's follow the mzungu. Mzungu ndiye anajua. Unaona nchi zao venye ziko developed, you see how they are? Why don't we follow that? Because that's where the world is moving. And that's just nonsense. The moment you lose your identity, you're doomed to become a follower of the person that you're following. And that is why, I repeat, Africa will never lead in anything if it still chooses to follow the Westerners. Because for you to follow, there has to be a leader. And since they have owned up to their style of doing this, they have owned up to the way of doing their finances and everything and all these developmental structures, what we're doing is we are following, and that's why we are always at the mercies of what they release. And that's a problem. That's a problem. So I'm going to be one of the people on the forefront of changing this narrative, as a filmmaker, as a designer, as a photographer, as someone who's in these arts. And I am going to be championing for this type of thing. So I know most of you actually share my ideals. I'd like to hear what you think of this topic in the comment section. But that being said, have a nice one.